Welcome to First Builders, the podcast for those who shape companies from the ground up. I'm Amber Illig, founder and general partner at the Counsel Capital, where we invest in early teams solving critical problems in essential industries.
And I'm Rachel Choi, partner at the Council. This podcast is about the people behind the playbooks, those who took a leap early and helped define companies before anyone knew their names.
Today's guest made a leap that might surprise you, starting her career as a lawyer before going on to lead some of the most cutting-edge AI and legal teams in Silicon Valley.
We're joined today by Cecilia Ziniti, founder and CEO of GCAI. Before launching her company, she had senior roles at Replit, Cruise, and Amazon Alexa, building at the intersection of law, product, and emerging technology.
This episode is really special to me personally because I've had the pleasure of seeing Cecilia up close in action as an in-house lawyer and as a founder. We served together on a business unit at Cruise and then kept in close touch as I launched the Council and she joined Replit. So when she spun out to found GCAI for General Counsels like herself, we were the first commitment in. And now it's our fastest growing portfolio company. Within the first year, they raised a $10 million Series A from Sound Ventures, and they're now serving over 450 customers.
We'll talk today about what drove her pivot from lawyer to founder, how she thinks about building trust in AI products, and what's next for legal as we enter the automation era.
Cecilia, welcome to First Builders.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks for the lovely intro.
Absolutely. So let's start from the top. We'd love to hear a little bit about your background, early days, and motivation. So tell us about those early days. What first drew you to the world of building and startups, especially coming from a legal background?
Yeah. So I would say huge inspiration was my dad as an entrepreneur. And I always kind of was on the entrepreneurial side of the professions that I did. And I think that's the independent streak, being an immigrant. But essentially, even when I was a baby attorney, the way that you are entrepreneurial is by doing BD, by getting out there, by meeting clients. And I never really shied away from that. So I would say that the inspiration has then continued. So my favorite podcast was How I Built This, and I got real satisfaction from doing things with my own two hands. And now it's a little bit different, right? Is selling or building or other things, but I was always increasingly drawn to builders. And so worked at Replit, worked at other very product-driven companies, and that was just kind of always been the case.
You mentioned, those high profile companies that you worked at. What was your earliest experience, I guess, like when you wanted to build something from scratch?
Let's see. Oh, the earliest kind of builder experience I had was I was actually at Yahoo. That was my first job out of undergrad. And at the time, in the early 2000s, Yahoo was still quite a cool company. So competing with Google, stock was going up a few dollars a month, eventually helped me pay for law school. But the org that was super interesting to me was really the product org and figuring out how to get services to users. So I spent a year in product management before I went to law school, and that was an incredibly formative year for me. One of the most high leverage in my career, because now, eventually as an attorney advising people building products, and then eventually now as a founder, having had that experience of, when the kind of theory, the management theory meets the real world, launching products, testing products. I still remember I worked on Yahoo Local at the time, and I used Thomas Keller French Laundry as my test account. And so I still remember that. But some of that comes from, having seen my dad, he's in manufacturing and he makes literally markers. So seeing the production line, seeing real things that you can and I think Patrick Collison said this on Twitter as well, is like anything you see in the world, somebody had an idea and did it. And so that was something that inspired me from very early on. And even in the legal world, I was eventually, I clerked and I worked at the Ninth Circuit, and seeing your opinion get cited, seeing things have impact, I always craved that.
That's awesome. And Cecilia, I feel like I've known you for such a long time because we crossed over at Cruise, and I never knew that you were a product manager before going into law. So it explains a lot, because I've often wondered like how you operate so well in this sort of like gray area between legal and tech and a lot of like industries that are really pushing the limit. So that's fascinating. But I'm curious, when you think back to the beginning, did you know you'd end up here? I mean, you're a founder of a Series A company. Were there any big signs that told you that this would be your eventual path?
I mean, I think I got advice once that what you're jealous of is this sort of like biblical envy type of thing is like a really strong indicator of something you should be doing. And for me, when I met other founders, jealousy is kind of the base way to think about it, but just like, wow, that is so cool. When I thought about who are the people that I had that reaction to, it was not the General Counsel of Amazon, even though he's amazing. So David Zapolsky is the General Counsel of Amazon. That is an incredibly high stress job and also much more of a lawyer. And for me, I craved being a general counsel because that was the point where you were not just a lawyer. And so that voice in my head, for me, I had a great executive coach who's basically been telling me, like, Cecilia, you need to be a founder for almost a decade. And, it took a minute to get there, but it's the most fun I've ever had now. And I'm so glad.
Well, it's great to hear that. Like, it sounds like you had so much confidence and almost like surety in going into this path. But I'm just curious, like, was there ever a moment when you doubted yourself? If so, how did you push through that?
I mean, moments of doubt for sure. And I think, there's a quote that I like, there's many, and what we can get into, but it's basically that courage is not the absence of fear, it's doing whatever it is despite that you have fear. And I think I've had that at various times, and I've always been somebody that's really tried to fill out kind of the mandala of my experience of like, oh, I could do this, and I realized that a general counsel and a CEO, you have to have that experience making decisions across a bunch of domains. So I've always been that way. And, I remember very clearly a moment at the law firm. I was maybe like a third or fourth year attorney. And when you become a third or fourth year attorney, the pressure to specialize and to kind of pick a lane becomes higher. So at the time, I had been doing both litigation for technology clients and deals for them, and deals that had kind of interesting, novel components like copyright, represented Apple, represented Autodesk, et cetera. But in that process, one of the partners, we went to lunch, and he basically said something to the effect of like, hey, now, like, you got to choose. Are you a litigator or are you a deal person? And, I spoke with him, but my reaction on the drive home, I think I even I don't want to say I cried, but it was definitely an emotional reaction where I was like, why can't I just be normal and want to do one thing and nose to the grindstone and just do that one thing and have that ladder step career, and then it took me a while, but I eventually realized that this ability to make connections among functions and to be drawn to different things and always be kind of thinking bigger, that's a feature, not a bug. So, but it definitely has been painful at different points to think about it that way and see others. I've got peers from law school and so on who are state senators and have these amazing careers, just, different paths.
Yeah. And just to keep pulling on that thread a little bit, I think what I've seen with first builders and operators like yourself is that there's always a bigger role ahead. There's always golden handcuffs. There's always a reason to keep taking that operator path. And so having worked at several major tech companies, would love for you to share what was the aha moment that led you to launch GCAI, where you were like, okay, I have to do this now. And this is the thing. Now's the time. I'm the person. I'm going to do it.
So I think it was somewhat incremental, but then there were definitely moments. So incremental would be, I realized when I took my most recent general counsel job that I couldn't be just a lawyer. I needed to be general counsel plus. And in fact, at Replit, my most recent role, I ran BD, I ran support. It was really more akin to kind of like a COO role, which a lot of GCs end up going into. And when I basically helped them grow, did their Series B extension, had a great relationship with the CEO. And what happened in my case was I got so taken with AI. My company had a deal with, Replit had a deal with OpenAI back in 22, early 22. So more than almost a year prior to the release of ChatGPT in November of 22. And so I had the opportunity to use GPT prior to ChatGPT, and it had the kind of jaw-dropping moments that I think others have had since of oh my God, this can do legal work, this can do, drafting. This is really a step change, similar to how I felt when I first used the iPhone or Google. It was so strong for me that I started, sending newsletters and teaching classes. And at some point, the CEO of Replit, Amjad, who is amazing and I've learned so much from as a builder and founder, he basically said something effective hey, you're a good GC, but is your head in it? And, and he started forwarding me, there was some legal hackers AI meetup or something. He forwarded that to me. I'm like, this has nothing to do with Replit. And I kind of basically ended up working out with him to have a successor, and I left. But it was really this almost compulsion. And I hear stories from other founders like that. And I feel lucky that that's what happened. But the moment when I really, there's a book that's super inspiring to me that I think your listeners should check out called Burn the Boats. And it's written by one of the sharks. I forget his name, but it's a great book. And it basically says that energy you spend on plan B is energy you're not putting into plan A. And you're sort of almost planning to fail. And so I read that book and it said basically like, dive the heck in, like, why not, bet on yourself kind of thing. And that was simultaneous to the time when I had left Replit. And I thought, I've been part of this venture community. I'd met you, Amber, and others through angel investing and other avenues. And so it didn't feel like that much of a risk when I did it, honestly. And in retrospect, I suppose it is, but it didn't feel like that at the time.
And I'm curious on that piece of it, as you were transitioning from operator to founder, was there a big kind of like hard challenge that you might not have been expecting, or, just like in those kind of early days of transitioning from operator to founder?
Things that were unexpected, I would say, is how much fun it is. I mean, I knew I would enjoy being a founder. I don't think I realized how much I would enjoy it. Just everything. And it's just like anything that you do, it's really, and this analogy is probably overused, but I have 4 kids, so I'll use it. It really is like having a child, where it's like milestones you don't expect. You're like, oh my God, this is incredible. Like the first time a user posted a review of our product without me knowing or even knowing who the user was, that was like, it felt like a first step, or the first time that we had a user tell us that he created a desktop tray icon of GCAI. And that was something that I'm like, it was just incredible. And so that was probably the most unexpected. Unexpected on the downside is, that I think I took a little bit for granted. I had been at early stage startups, but not truly 0 to 1. Just like how much of the infra you have to set up yourself. I mean, everything from like, payroll and this, and now, there's software for that, but someone's still got to manage the software, buy the software, whatever. And it's like, you think about like the royal we, it's like you and your co-founder and the lamp, like they're not somebody else. And so that's definitely the surprise on the downside, I think.
That's awesome. So we talked about how you've joined some name brand companies and you even threw Yahoo in there. I know people listening are going to be wondering, how did you even know that those companies were going to be successful? And maybe you didn't, but what made you actually pick those companies? Like Yahoo, Amazon obviously existed before you joined, but I remember when Alexa came out, everybody thought, oh, I don't really know if this product is really going to take off. I can't imagine having it in my home. And then all of a sudden it was in everybody's home. Cruise grew to, multi-billion-dollar company while you were there. And then Replit has been super successful too. So like, what is it that in those early career days, when you were looking at the opportunities you had ahead of you, was there some sort of a lens you were looking through that helped you make those decisions?
I would say for me, early internet, when I came out to the Bay Area, it was clear to me that the internet was going to go crazy. And that's probably the single biggest. Beyond that, I think it's kind of like a lot of the VCs say, look at what the teen hackers, like, PG, Paul Graham talks about, look at what teen hackers are doing, because that's what is going to happen next. And Replit was an example of that. But, I think living in the Bay Area in particular is a huge hack. Like just the amount of internet and services that we use, and Cruise and Waymo are a great example, but just things that are just completely commonplace for us that haven't quite hit the mainstream yet. Deeply inspired by the Crossing the Chasm book. But some of it is like, I think, the other one is like, you also do have to have a little bit of a leap of faith. So when I joined Amazon, I didn't actually know I was going to be working on Alexa. I was actually recruited to Amazon, and I'd represented Apple, and I thought surely they're going to hire me for this mobile phone. And I get there, and it's kind of a funny story. I get there, and the senior attorney is like, so you're going to have the more senior attorneys work on the phone because it's really important to Jeff. We've got this device. It doesn't really work. It's Laura at the time, I had a code name. And, it literally was like taped together. You'll appreciate this being a hardware person, but I think it was like a DVT build. And, just seeing that, it turned out to be this incredible thing, and just having that faith. But in terms of picking companies, this gets to that envy point around like, a girlfriend of mine picked basically 2 decacorns, and she was in the first 20 employees of both. And you're like, and now she's a VC, you're like, wow, but you can't, like, you got to run your own race. So I look to sort of a leadership thing on that, but the tech adoption stuff, I think Crossing the Chasm has some great insights. The other is also to never stop learning. That's the other big thing. Like, people talk about this is a big thing. Reid Hoffman talks about this a lot, but basically the idea that, there will always be something to be curious about. And, this is that contrast, right? So that feeling I had that I was not going to be this like ladder step person, but pick up new interests, that's something that I think has been helpful in finding interesting things, because you learn about them, you see what the chatter is. And, if I hadn't have been talking to so many GCs to learn in my GC role, to learn to be a better GC, I wouldn't have been able to found this company.
When I kind of hear you speak, to me, it sounds like you have like a very high risk tolerance as you make these decisions. And of course, founding your own company. Is there something that you think is in your DNA that just makes you comfortable, taking that leap into these different startups and, of course, launching your own company now?
Because it's not normal.
Yeah,
Like you meet people like that,
I think
but
it is a
not
higher
everybody
risk
does.
tolerance. Yeah, I mean, I think lawyers, it's amplified a little bit because our opportunity cost is so high. So my billing rate, if I was in private practice, would be, approaching $2,000 an hour. And so like, it definitely is a higher trade-off, but I think everybody's got it, the mortgage, kids, et cetera. But for me, I mean, I think, I would be, I wouldn't be doing a service to my family if I didn't say, having a husband who is, we're a 2-career family. And we've also been pretty savvy about saving, right? So when I was at Yahoo, the stock was doing really well and I didn't spend it. I ended up using it for law school tuition and then, getting into the sort of more family logistics thing. Like I overinvested on childcare because I knew that the time of me setting myself up for success from a career perspective by having a nanny, even when I was in law school, not making any money. We did a nanny share in Oakland and doing that would set me up for success. So I think it's risk taking is like the other big thing is like, what's the worst that happens? And, that's obviously a fatalistic way to look at it. But realistically, if you go to one of these companies, it doesn't work out. Like no one can take away, like in my case, I had a law degree. And the law degree means that I will always have a threshold earning power. And, it's something that I advise others too. There's this trope about unhappy lawyers, but you know what? Unhappy all the way to the bank. Like, it's like, what helps give you that is that ability to know that you have that. And I think that's a little bit of an immigrant thing too. My parents have also been big. I know a lot of immigrant families are big on real estate. So, was able to save and buy a house, when the interest rates were low and so on. And so basically setting yourself up for success in that way makes it easier to take risks. But it is, it is a personality thing. It's also, status quo is a risk too. Would be my other flag. A lot of people think that the big tech companies are very safe. And, I met a gal, another friend who lives in Houston, and all her childhood friends, all their parents were at Enron and had all their, IRAs in Enron. So, I mean, that's something nobody would have ever considered that a risk at the time. And then those were, completely wiped out. And so I would say like it's a balance of setting yourself up for success and then, kind of betting on yourself.
We've talked a lot about what led you to this point of founding your own company. And so now I'd love to talk about lessons in the trenches that you're learning as you're building. But before we get into that, for context, can you share a little bit about what GCAI does with our listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. So GCAI is a platform, an AI platform for in-house counsel. And as attorneys, and particularly as lawyers serving companies in-house, we have special needs when it comes to AI, which is precision. So as lawyers, we're trained on many, many words. That's part of being able to home in on specific words and specific concepts and do legal reasoning is just a higher demand than an ordinary AI tool like a ChatGPT or a Copilot. So in building the company, that's what we've done is can we make AI for lawyers that's usable by lawyers? That's been the mission. And we've been very lucky to get to, 300 customers and, healthy ARR across lots of industries because we've taken that focus on building an AI platform for this particular persona, which was me. So we've had a benefit there. Also, shout out to my co-founder, bringing a lot, his name's Bardi Pourvakil, he's a CTO, bringing a lot of software concepts to a really legacy form of software, which is software for lawyers. We've seen just incredible uptake from, honestly making the software beautiful. So that's what I would say is the kind of core description of the product. So plug getgc.ai/careers. Would love to have your listeners. We've got a variety of business roles and engineering roles.
It's awesome. We're super proud to have GCAI in our portfolio at the council.
You've seen like that evolution of tech firsthand, starting at Yahoo, all the way to Replit and of course GCAI. What do you think is very different about building now versus kind of like 5 or 10 years ago?
I mean, obviously AI. So the impact of Cursor and the ability to use AI on our engineering team, it shocks me almost every day. Like it's really incredible that we have with a scrappy team of less than 5 engineers, are building software with many, many DAOs and winning deals against $70 billion incumbents on a weekly basis. So that's, I would say, the biggest is on the engineering side. Other things that are different, honestly, the explosion of SaaS to help us out, right? So, Rippling and Deal and, even, QuickBooks and others to make it easier. I have felt like the business and the corporate side of running a company are significantly easier than they would have been at the time. The other I would say is, I think venture capital has changed, and that'll be interesting to your folks. We did a special purpose vehicle for our round, and we got 25 GCs as part of it. And those are people now that are supporters of ours. Kind of this democratization of the idea that like startups are cool now. I think that, they've been cool in my mind for a long time, but now that's the case. Although seeing a little bit more of a pendulum swing among recent grads now back to the FANG companies or the Magnificent Seven or what have you, OpenAI. But I would say those are the biggest three: is the AI impact on engineering, the kind of SaaS to help you, the things around the business. And then, basically I think startups and VC are more commonplace now.
Yeah. And then you mentioned Cursor, but are there any other emerging trends in AI or tech right now that particularly excite you as you're building?
I've been just amazed at how quickly we are crossing the chasm with this technology. And that book has been deeply inspiring for me, but I can send you the slide and you can put it in the show notes, but I did a presentation in June of last year to a group of in-house attorneys, and I did a poll. And at the time, 50% of them had not used AI for legal work, 56%. Same group, In-House Connect, 6 months later in January, and that number was down to 30%. And this is just in 6 months, identical group. And it was shocking to me because that crossing the chasm curve, if you read the original book, it assigns percentages to early adopters, enthusiasts, et cetera. And it was like that's exactly what my data showed. And so that surprise of just like how fast this is going, even just at a general level, that's been the most surprising thing. Other trends I see is, that there's opportunity in areas that have not traditionally had opportunity from software. I think legal is the pinnacle example of that, but you see others. I read about an AI for ophthalmologists that had been trained on many scans of eyes, and essentially that's been some of the original pre-LLM AI around pattern matching and making that job easier and better. Similarly for oncology, lots of stuff in healthcare. I know you have some port codes, but that's the other trend I see, although less directly, but more just from the standpoint of like for me, AI, I was talking with another founder, Caleb Hicks, the founder of School AI. He and I were together at Lambda School. And he initially had a company idea that was not AI and spent a year on that. And then, ChatGPT came out and he's like, oh my gosh, I had a similar compulsion to me. And we were talking and he said, this is different. And I said, yeah, this felt like using the iPhone. And he said something to the effect of, I can't stop thinking of ideas for my ICP with this tech. It's very similar for me, that like there's literally an unlimited number of things we could do. There's millions of kinds of agreements. There's millions of workflows. There's any kind of lawyer for any kind of company. And I just can't stop thinking of it. And he and I were actually contrasting it with blockchain or, Web3 or crypto. Personally, I don't want to be controversial, but I personally don't have a lack of faith in the financial system. So I couldn't think of those use cases, whereas he and I were literally, couldn't sleep thinking of ideas and thinking of things that we could build with AI.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I talk about and hear about this all the time, like with founders, just like with the tech that's coming and all the possibilities, endless possibilities really, and what's going to be built over the next few years. So switching gears a little bit, we know that one of the hardest parts, of course, of being a founder is just having to make, tough decisions. Can you walk us through maybe a critical moment when you had to pivot or you had to scrap an idea or, anything like that?
I've been pretty lucky, I would say, that the big things we've gotten right. So what market to go after, the timing, the shape of the initial product. And so getting the big decisions right, I think helps a lot with the absolute infinity number of other decisions. Everything you do, from what Slack you post as a CEO, is a decision. And that volume, I think I definitely underestimated that. But what are some things that I got wrong? So, hiring is the classic one. And I would agree with all the literature on early startup hiring. It's exceptionally difficult. And you realize, and this is something that Molly Graham says too, is like, it's okay if the problem is you or your company, like in the sense that you can't become something you're not. So she talks about hiring early stage salespeople who who wanted more structure, who wanted goals and targets and sales enablement materials. And she was very clear with them, like, we can't provide that. We can try and we give you user stories and whatnot, but that's not this job. And, there's a scenario where as a founder or as a company, you might think that's a failing, but having that realization that no, this is the stage that we're at. I would say lacking stage appropriateness is probably my biggest mistake in hiring and, working on that. Other kind of big decisions in the road, I think when you're doing well, there is pressure to fundraise, and that's fine. But it's also like taking a step back and not letting fundraise be consuming. That was definitely something that I was moderately susceptible to. Other decisions, I think there's like tactical things like, OpenAI launched a GPT store. We're debating, like, do we keep something in there for lead gen? There's like a million things like that. And, I think you just have to, I think it's Ray Dalio or one of the big mutual fund people is like, you just got to be right more often than you're wrong. And, like 51%, 49, that's probably too low a percentage, but just like consistently making your decisions better and doing the things you're doing better. That's something I think is underestimated startup advice is like basically the atomic habits, 1% better every day. Bezos talks about it as like divine discontent that, your customers are never going to want slower or more expensive. They're always going to want faster, cheaper, better. So just like use that as your orientation. That's been a big hack for us at GCAI.
That's awesome. And I totally resonated with what you said about, not always getting early hires right. I think a lot of portfolio founders that I talk to experience the same thing. And I've also experienced it as an operator and as a VC. It's just really hard to know like when's the right time and what's the right level of person you need. And I even saw Ankur Nagpal, the CEO of Ocho, or Carried, the other day was saying that like on one of his webinars, he was saying just accept the fact that as an early stage founder, like 1 in 5 of every hires are going to be maybe not the right person. So I would love to just kind of pull on that thread for a second. Like, let's talk about team building. So how did you approach like choosing your co-founder, Bardia, who's been amazing, and then those early hires and collaborators? And what do you think the top performers have in common?
Yeah. So my co-founder, Bardia, and I worked together at Replit and just work together incredibly well and have this really deep yin yang thing going on of like, at this point, I would say I'm a pretty traditionally sales and marketing CEO. He spikes in, design, product and engineering. And so there was kind of the substantive thing, but it's also just honestly, like we were friends and we enjoyed each other's company and respected each other's work. And so when I thought about building, it was a very quick, I think I wrapped up at Replit and called him a few days later and it worked out. I did consider, with legal AI in particular, a lot of folks are seeing the opportunity that I saw. And so I had opportunity to be co-founder with others, but it wasn't that natural, like really liking the person and seeing the possibilities and having that mix around both of us have this vision and then but both of us are willing to kind of grind and execute. So I would say that's a difference. That was a success on the founder side. On the, people who are successful in startups, I actually looked at the Amazon leadership principles. I'm deeply inspired by them, the original 14. And I think it's a lot of the same things, right? So ownership, bias for action, resourcefulness. And resourcefulness is like, it's things like, can you figure out Luma? That's like something dumb, but it's literally like tactical where like, you're like, oh, send out the invites on Luma. And like, I swear I've had people who can't figure it out, right? Or like, just wanting something written out is like, that figure it outiveness is like probably one of the tops. The other is like, I think it's like you do have to expect to have different jobs. And if you're somebody that does not expect that, and regardless of the work-life thing, it's not like a work-life thing of like 80 hours a week or whatever, although maybe you do work that many hours, but you can work fewer hours and still take the approach that you'll do what it takes as opposed to that's not my job. Now, I can see, longer term, we talked about Molly Graham and graduating from, you do every job in your function, as founding marketer, you're doing lead gen and you're doing SEO and you're doing, events and what have you. So we will graduate from that. And that's a natural evolution of the company. But right now, the people that are successful are like, I'm a marketer, or even more at large, I'm an early team member at GCA.
Yeah, I love that. It actually reminds me of one of, I think my early interviewers used to say, oh, like, when you join this company, you're probably going to do maybe 30% of the work that feels like below you. 30% of your work is going to maybe feel about right. And then 30% of the work might be like, really stretch you, really challenging and all of that. And I felt like it was just like a really good kind of primer for what going into an early stage startup was going to feel like. Like, it's not that it's beneath you. It's just, it's going to feel like maybe something that you didn't expect, to be part of the job as well. And I felt like that mindset just helped prepare me, in that early stage life. And I actually now borrow that whenever I had interviewed for early stage hires as well. So I felt like that always helps set the expectations.
100%, 100%. And I mean, this is something that I maybe could do better so my co-founder and now our VP of Ops and Finance are big on warning people about the job, the sort of like anti-job interview of like, hey, this is intense. Like, are you up for this? Like, here's what the job will look like. I'm more of a sales kind of personality. And I'm also very much an optimist, which we should talk about. I think that's a key ingredient to being a founder. But so I don't love the you shouldn't work here if, right? So Rippling did or not Rippling, who's the military tech people? Oh gosh.
Like Anduril?
Yeah, Anduril did a video this week of like why you shouldn't work at Anduril. And it's kind of tongue in cheek of like, you shouldn't work here if you like 9 to 5 or you like, working 10 to 3 or whatever. And so, I think that explicitly saying what it takes is probably helpful. I probably don't do that enough, but it's definitely like, I think people being honest with themselves and if they're actually up for it. I mean, the other thing too is as we grow, I'm realizing now that you do need different personalities and paces to make up a team. And so that's something that's been a harder lesson because if I hire all people like me, it's like 50 ideas and you execute 35 of them, but maybe you need somebody that's going to have 5 ideas and execute the crap out of those 5, So that's something that I think about a lot and is painful as the 45 ideas person to adjust to the culture, to working with those folks, but you need both.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we love, celebrating great operators like yourself. What do you think your superpower is when you kind of like look back and, think about yourself?
Superpower, I think it's definitely the connecting with people. I mean, this is something that like I've always, just genuinely wanted to give without condition, and to the point where it's almost to a fault, right? Like I get probably, 2 or 3 LinkedIn reach outs a week for career advice that I can't help anymore. But the flip side of that is someone I gave career advice to probably 5 or 6 years ago is now one of our bigger customers. I took his call. He was trying to figure out a new GC role. I ended up helping him navigate that. I helped him negotiate a little bit. And at the time, giving a full hour of my time to somebody who was basically random would have been a give. But that realization that the compounding power of people and relationships is probably the biggest. You have to bring the goods too. And I think I'm good at that. But I'm certainly inspired by Sam Altman, who talks about if you can be top 5% at 2 skills, so in my case, lawyering and tech, then you suddenly become 0001 because you take the 0.5 times, or 5% times 5%, and you become elite in that way. The effort required to be an elite lawyer would have been much higher for me than being able to combine the disciplines. So I would say kind of cross-functional or multidisciplinary skills plus people has been a superpower for me.
That's awesome. Yeah, when you talk about, your fascination being with people and relationships and wanting to give before you take, it kind of explains a little bit about why you've been so successful from my point of view at things like sales and marketing, which had previously nothing to do with your earlier career, like as a lawyer and a GC. And I think at Replit, you started to take on some of the marketing because the company was so small. But just seeing you step into the founder role and start building a newsletter that was instantly like my favorite newsletter that I subscribed to. And I'm not just saying that because you're a portfolio founder. Like I love reading it and I'm like learning everything going on in AI and I'm shocked at the speed at which these things come out. And so it's just been fascinating to see that. But it makes sense now hearing you say that. It ties back to this sort of fascination and love for relationships and people, and kind of thinking about like, how is all of this that's happening in the world of AI impacting not only my customers, but everyone that's trying to just wrap their minds around what's happening right now. So, and that's some of the best sales and marketing is when you actually give before you ask for anything in return. So love that. We're going to transition now to rapid fire builder's playbook. So we're going to ask you some really quick questions. Don't feel like you have to think too hard about it, but yeah, we'll just jump right into it. So first thing that comes to mind, Rachel, take it away.
Yeah. So biggest failure and what you learned from that.
Like in life? I don't know.
Anything.
Let's see. Well, I would say I was a secondee to a Cupertino-based electronics maker. And as a secondee, basically the firm sends you there and you do your job. Essentially what I realized was that they wanted a secondee, someone from a law firm, because the actual job to be done, effectively an audit, was so boring that they couldn't get a full-time person to do it. And so I went, and essentially what I realized was that in that job, and it was also fascinating because they only had budget for 35 hours a week, but that was too many hours for me to go back to the firm. So essentially I had a short amount of time that I was working, or, I could only work that amount of time. And I was pregnant at the time. So you would sound like a dream job, but I went there and I couldn't deal with it. Like what I realized was like, I need a job that's 60 hours a week busy sometimes in order to be fulfilled during the other hours a week. It was very much a like unitask, like here's your pile of files to go through. And it was nothing with people. It was 100% desk based. It was one task at a time. And it was so not my personality that by the end of it, I did fine. I powered through it, but at the end of it, I was effectively offered to convert to full time or, work with them further. And I said no, because it was so not my thing. And so I guess it was a fail in the sense that it was just a task I was completely unsuited for, but a win in the end, because I had that realization and I had been playing with, okay, maybe I should take a part-time role because I had kids and stuff, but I realized that wasn't for me.
So if you could give your past self one piece of advice, what would it be?
It sounds cheesy, but I think it's to have faith, right? Like one foot in front of the other. Like this will lead to a fun path. I mentioned the being sad at the law firm and other stuff, but I genuinely remember myself talking with a partner at a firm when I was deciding between two firms. And I'm like, oh my God, do I go to this firm or that firm? And this one's better at this one's better at that. And I was so just torn up about that decision. And at the time, the person was like, it doesn't matter. And it feels condescending to receive that advice. But in retrospect, I'm very confident that my career would have been fine had I gone to the other firm. And my career has turned out great as it is. So this really truly believing, not just in a console yourself way, but truly believing that, that having faith that you'll do well, that would be my advice.
Favorite productivity hack that keeps you efficient?
I use a clipboard manager. And it is so epic because anything I've cut and pasted in the last 3 weeks is in there. And
Wow.
so you can search it, and it's one of these random things that I don't know why more people don't do it, but that is my weird productivity hack.
And what's one industry trend that you think is overrated?
I would say remote work abroad is a little overrated. We've had folks who are abroad who are successful, but Athena is the VA thing. And I just felt so bad. It was 3 a.m. for this person that I found myself not assigning them tasks. And so I would say, that's something I think will move slower than some folks think.
So let's play a quick game, kind of towards the end of what we're calling Founders Wishes. If you had a magic wand, what is one wish you'd make for yourself as a founder, for your company, and for the future of your industry?
Myself as a founder, my wish is what I'm doing, right? So I don't know that I would necessarily have a wish, because I've realized many times that there's this butterfly wings flapping type of situation with a company. And so I don't necessarily have a personal one, although, constantly getting better at hiring, I think is probably the one that I would pick. And then for the company, it's that we're able to meet the moment. So right now I get over 50% of legal teams I talk with have a AI goal in 25. And so orienting the company incredibly hard on that, because it's very unusual to have, half of your buyers in market in a year, and that's what we have. So meeting the moment and being able to scale fast enough to get the product into people's hands this year is my wish for the company. And then for the legal profession, one of the things that, I didn't talk about this, but one of the inspirations for founding GCAI was I saw a study that GitHub did of users of then GitHub Copilot, software engineers. And it was a question of how satisfied are you at work, scale of 1 to 10? And are you a user of Copilot or similar AI for software engineering? And they found almost more than a 20% differential in those two groups in happiness. And at the time I thought, the legal profession is, there's tropes about lawyers being unhappy and stressed and, kind of substance abuse in the profession and so on. But my reaction was like, if I can make a technology and get it into people's hands that makes people 20% lawyers, 20% happier in the work that they do, like that's an incredibly fulfilling like life goal. And so I would say for the profession, it's that we have a similar uptake around AI where it does increase happiness and it does really raise the game for all of the legal profession.
That's awesome. And Cecilia, before we close out, what's one final thought that you'd like to leave our listeners with, knowing that it's mostly early stage founders and operators?
Do the thing. Like I think all the, the regret minimization framework, I would say is the biggest, but one foot in front of the other, less time thinking, more time doing would be the biggest. And doing doesn't have to be coding. It can be sending an email. It can be doing a meetup. It can be, reach outs to your ICP, but measuring yourself week over week. What's the big thing I got done this week? Like not month, not year, not quarter, week. And so, or even day, but I think week is better. That would be my advice for founders.
Rachel, what stood out to you from this conversation?
There are so many things. I feel like Cecilia just has a lot of great little quotes to share. But I think the main one for me, especially coming from my days in leading teams at Komodo, was just how she thinks about hiring the team, how she thinks about setting expectations when you're working at a startup and what it takes to really work at a startup, especially when she mentioned even, being able to be resourceful and creating Luma invites as an example.
Yeah, completely. I feel like a lot of people feel the pressure, like I need to be able to do all of these big things really well, but it's also just being able to jump into all the small things and learn firsthand. So I totally agree. And then one other thing I liked that she mentioned was just throughout her career, you could see at different points in time, she really had her ear to the ground in terms of big waves happening with technology. And of course, we all saw the internet come live, the iPhone launch and AI now. I think people like Cecilia and first builders, especially Cecilia, they see these things kind of at the start and they start working on it before it becomes massively known. And so it feels like she saw that when she decided to join Yahoo. She was like, there's something happening here with the internet. I should probably be a part of this. And then she talked a little bit about how it's such an advantage to be in the Bay Area because you do see these things, before others really know that it's going to be huge. You can kind of see the writing on the wall. So it was cool to see that happen again and again throughout her career.
Yeah, definitely. And speaking of her career, I think like there were probably two big things that I really loved about her career. One, the fact that she was in product before law, like that probably just gave her such a better sense as she was, building. And of course, today when she's building. And then the other one too, just how becoming a lawyer just like really set her up to take those risks later on in her career, especially as like for her, the worst case scenario, right, was, I'll have to go back to being a lawyer. And it just really allowed her, I think, the freedom to start GCAI as well.
Yeah, totally. On the product before law thing, it's funny because I didn't even know that about Cecilia. And sometimes when I'm describing her behind her back, I always say, she has this super unique experience where as a lawyer, she's always worked at the intersection of cutting edge technology and legal, which is very rare. And it's not a black and white environment. You really have to have your business hat on and evaluate risk in a different way as a lawyer. And so, I think it makes sense now that I know she used to be in product that she can kind of wear those two hats and decide when she's putting one on or the other on. And then what you mentioned too about taking risks, later on in her career, she waited to found this company until she had all of these incredible experiences from Yahoo to Amazon to Cruise to Replit. And, I've heard from other founders with a similar background to hers that have been at great companies like Vercel, for instance. They've said to me, hey, I feel self-conscious when I see the list of YC founders and they all look really young and it seems like they just graduated from college. They have so much energy. I do that. And I think Cecilia's journey with GCAI has really been a testament to what proven operators and first builders can really do if they spin out later in their career. It's a different superpower than somebody who, maybe they can stay up all night coding and do all these great things and they have less responsibilities. But I think first builders have deep networks. They've learned a lot of tough lessons on the ground. And so they can leapfrog some early first-time founder pitfalls when they do launch a company. And so I thought that was really cool to hear in her story as well.
Yeah, definitely. Well, if you enjoyed this episode, share it with a founder, leave us a review, and subscribe to First Builders wherever you get your podcasts.
Yeah, you can follow us at The Counsel on LinkedIn and The Counsel Cap on X, and be sure to subscribe to our newsletter at thecounsel.co for more insights from early operators.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for listening. We'll see you next time.
Bye.